The ballroom sparkled with soft gold light. Elegant banners read, "Women Leading Forward 2025," and a live camera panned across rows of senators, CEOs, and first ladies past and present. Viewers across the nation watched, some out of admiration, others curiosity. At the center sat First Lady Melania Trump, graceful and poised in a pale blue suit. Her voice, cool and steady, echoed through the room as she described her early years in modeling, her journey to America, and what she called the misunderstood strength behind her silence. Polite applause followed her words. No one dared challenge her, until a microphone crackled. Seated 5 chairs down was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, composed but focused. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile. She simply leaned forward and asked, "Would you be proud to see your son, Barron, follow the exact same path?" The question sliced through the air. The room froze. Melania blinked, lips parting slightly. For the first time, she didn't have an immediate response. The applause died instantly. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, exposing. And somewhere in the back, a camera operator whispered, "Keep rolling." What had started as a celebration now teetered into something far more human. Melania Trump stared straight ahead, her carefully polished expression faltering for the briefest moment. The audience wasn't breathing. Crockett didn't repeat the question. She didn't move. She let the silence linger, not as punishment, but as invitation. Melania's eyes fluttered toward the ceiling. She blinked slowly. It was the look of someone revisiting memories she had buried long ago. Runways at 19, hotel rooms filled with leering eyes, contracts she didn't fully understand in a language she was still learning. The First Lady turned slightly toward Crockett. Her voice, when it returned, was softer. "My son is different," she said. Crockett didn't nod. She didn't need to. "But were you different?" A quiet voice whispered from the audience. No one laughed. No one dared. Melania placed her hands in her lap. Her rings sparkled under the lights, but her face had lost all shine. She looked down, almost like a mother, not a first lady. A slow, deep inhale. Then, the camera caught something stunning. Her hands were trembling. She hadn't been shaken by criticism. But something about that question, about Barron, was undoing her. Across the room, Crockett sat still, eyes filled not with judgment, but understanding. And the nation leaned in closer. The next panelist tried to speak, but stumbled. A new energy had overtaken the room, one of rawness, of something unplanned, too real for rehearsed remarks. Crockett hadn't moved since her question. She hadn't smirked or looked satisfied. In fact, her face showed something deeper, grief. Grief for every young girl who had walked into a room thinking it was opportunity and left with a part of her missing. Melania finally looked directly at Crockett. "I made choices I don't regret," she said, "but I would protect my son from those same choices." Her voice cracked on protect. And suddenly, for the first time that day, Jasmine Crockett spoke more than a question. "Every woman in this room has protected someone," she said gently. "But who protected you, First Lady?" Melania's eyes welled. The audience no longer saw a political figure. They saw a woman remembering the moments no one had protected her. Not the photographers, not the agents, not even the silence she wrapped around herself. Tears began to roll down faces across the room. One panelist removed her earring to wipe hers away. And across the country, viewers who tuned in expecting speeches found something else. Truth wrapped in quiet, devastating courage. C-SPAN's cameras stayed fixed. No cutaways, no music, just stillness. Inside the packed hall, a low hum of tension grew. Someone in the second row dropped their pen. It sounded like thunder. An intern, just 22 and seated near the production booth, whispered into her headset. This wasn't in the prep packet. She was right. No one planned for truth. Jasmine Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't lean back in satisfaction. She simply sat still, hands folded on the table, her expression soft. This wasn't about scoring points. This was about opening a door most people spend their lives avoiding. Melania shifted in her seat. In the front row, two teenage girls, invited by a non-profit for young women of color, clutched each other's hands. One whispered, "She's the only one asking something real." And across the country, mothers paused their laundry. Fathers muted football games. Girls in dorm rooms stopped scrolling. Because they saw something rare. A black woman asking a white first lady not to defend herself, but to be honest with herself. And in doing so, Crockett didn't just change the room. She changed what counted as leadership. She didn't cry, but Melania's silence was louder than any tears. "I came to America with a dream," she finally said. Her voice was clear but low, almost like she wasn't speaking to the audience, just to herself. "I took pictures. I signed contracts. I did what I thought I had to." She paused. "I was 17 the first time a man twice my age told me I was valuable only because of how I looked. I smiled. I said thank you." No one clapped. There was no applause line in that. From the far corner, one of the younger panelists, a tech CEO, blinked hard, visibly shaken. Crockett stayed quiet. She had no need to interrupt what had already begun. Melania turned toward the moderator, who looked pale. "I don't regret my past," she continued. "But when Jasmine asked about Barron, I saw him at 12, then 16. I imagined someone saying to him, 'Take off your shirt, smile wider, don't ask questions.' She swallowed, and my heart said no." The audience wasn't just watching anymore. They were remembering their own sons, their own daughters, their own silence. And this summit became something else entirely, a reckoning. Backstage, a volunteer stood frozen. She was only 19, still in college, still figuring herself out. Her job had been to refill water bottles and cue panelists, but now she clutched her pass in her hands, tears brimming in her eyes. Her name was Alana. She had come to this event feeling small. She had sat through 2 panels where women talked about grit and breaking glass ceilings while wearing $3,000 heels. She didn't feel seen. But then Jasmine asked that question. And Melania, stoic, untouchable Melania, broke. Not with shame, but with something real. And suddenly, Alana's story mattered too. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone and texted her mom, "Thank you for protecting me. I didn't understand until now." On stage, the energy had shifted. More panelists lowered their mics. They didn't want to perform anymore. They wanted to confess. And Jasmine Crockett, she remained still, present, listening. She had broken no one. She had demanded nothing. But her question had made the room honest. And Alana, the girl in the blue dress, would never forget it. Because sometimes one quiet moment can give 100 women permission to breathe again. Jasmine Crockett hadn't moved, but inside her, 1,000 memories were rising like a quiet storm. She remembered Nayla, her college roommate. Brilliant, fierce, gone too soon. Nayla had wanted to be a lawyer too, but she left school after her internship at a downtown firm. She never explained why. She just stopped showing up to class. It wasn't until years later, in a coffee shop near Dallas, that Jasmine saw her again, working behind the counter, quiet, changed. "He told me I didn't have the face for courtrooms," Nayla had whispered. "But you had the heart," Jasmine had said. Now, seated under bright lights, Jasmine wasn't just thinking of Melania. She was thinking of every girl who was told to smile instead of speak. Every young woman who had been offered a stage, but not a seat at the table. She looked at Melania, not with anger, but with something else. Shared ache. And the moment no one saw, Off camera, unnoticed, was Melania nodding back at her. Slightly, almost imperceptibly. They weren't the same. But for one moment, they understood each other. And the weight of that truth made Jasmine blink back tears she hadn't expected. Her name was Evelyn Marcus, 64 years old, retired teacher. She'd driven 6 hours from Little Rock just to attend the summit. She had come to be inspired. She hadn't expected to be unraveled. When Jasmine asked that question, Evelyn froze. Her mind didn't go to politics, or modeling, or Melania. Her mind went to her own daughter, Tasha, who ran away at 17. Tasha had wanted to be a singer, moved to LA. Evelyn begged her to finish high school first, but the lights were too bright, the promises too slick. Tasha never became famous. She came back home 5 years later, quiet, fragile, eyes older than her body. Evelyn sat in the audience now, clutching her purse, realizing something she never admitted out loud. She never once asked her daughter what had happened out there. She'd been too afraid of the answer. Now, as Melania's voice cracked and Jasmine remained still, Evelyn let one tear slide down her cheek, and then another. Because this summit wasn't about policy anymore. It was about all the unspoken stories women carry. And for the first time in decades, Evelyn whispered to herself, "I should have asked her." The moderator looked down at her note cards, lost. The next question had been about global literacy rates, but no one wanted to hear stats now. The air had changed. One panelist, a senator from Vermont, spoke softly. "I was told at 23 to change my voice, to speak higher, less firm. I was told no man would marry a woman who debated too hard." She paused. "I changed my voice. I didn't get married anyway." Laughter didn't come, only sighs. Melania, still seated, leaned slightly forward. Her voice shook, but she spoke again. "I used to believe silence made me strong. Now I wonder if it just made me invisible." Across the table, Jasmine's eyes filled again, not with pity, but with something deeper. Respect. She hadn't needed to speak more. The question had done its work. And now, story after story was spilling out like opened floodgates. One woman admitted she never told her husband she was assaulted in college. Another said she burned her first journal because it was too emotional. The audience wept quietly, and the camera, still rolling, captured what no one expected: women finally being heard. Not for what they survived, but for what they had never said out loud. Jasmine's hand hovered over the microphone again, but this time she didn't speak. She thought about her mother, Doris Crockett, a school secretary in Dallas, who raised 3 daughters alone after her husband passed when Jasmine was just 9. She remembered the days Doris skipped dinner to make sure Jasmine had lunch money. She remembered how her mom ironed her Sunday dress while singing old Mahalia Jackson hymns. Her voice cracked, her back sore, but her eyes always hopeful. And one night, years ago, Jasmine had asked her mother, "Did you ever want more than this?" Her mother had looked at her gently and replied, "I wanted to be free." That was all she said. Not rich, not famous, just free. Jasmine had never forgotten that. Now, sitting at a table surrounded by cameras, her mother's voice whispered through her heart again. She looked at Melania. Jasmine wasn't judging her past. She wasn't trying to shame her. She was doing what her mother once did, offering a pause, a mirror, a moment to ask, "Were you ever free?" And in the silence that followed, something changed in Melania's eyes. For the first time, they were wet. Melania shifted uncomfortably. She reached for her water but didn't drink. Everyone watched, not as an audience, but as witnesses. "I don't want him judged," Melania said softly. "The world already stares at him too much." Crockett nodded, gently. "I understand," she said. Melania's voice wavered. "Barron, he doesn't like cameras. He doesn't like being followed. But he's kind. He paints. He writes little poems. He's quiet like I used to be." The room softened. I used to think I was protecting him by being silent. But maybe silence isn't safety. Maybe it's something else. She trailed off. A woman in the audience, a journalist who hadn't cried in years, reached into her bag for tissues. Another panelist took off her heels and sat barefoot, like the room had stopped pretending it was anything other than sacred now. And Jasmine? She just listened, let it breathe. Because in this moment, Melania wasn't the first lady. She was a mother asking herself, what would I do if the world tried to take my child's voice like it once took mine? And in that question, millions of mothers watching felt something crack open deep in their chests, and many began to weep. No one was moderating anymore. The cards were gone. The stage clock was off. Even the press pool had stopped scribbling. They were just watching now, with red eyes and heavy hearts. A CEO from Atlanta, a woman known for being cold and brilliant, spoke next. "I was trafficked at 17, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My resume doesn't say that. My LinkedIn doesn't say that. But it's the truth." Gasps. Then stillness again. She looked at Jasmine. "Your question? It made me think. Would I want my daughter to take my path if it meant walking through that?" She shook her head. "No, never." Jasmine nodded again. Not with pride, but with grief. Real leadership isn't about leading the loudest. It's about asking what no one dares to ask. In that room, the tone had fully changed. The stage was no longer a panel. It was a confessional. Tears flowed freely now. And somewhere backstage, a White House aide whispered to another, "This isn't political anymore. It's human." The camera zoomed slowly in on Jasmine's face. She looked calm, but in her stillness, she had turned a room of power into a room of truth. And the nation kept watching, speechless. For 13 years, it stayed tucked inside her wallet, creased, sun-faded, edges worn soft from time. A photo of Jasmine Crockett at 16. She's standing beside her cousin Tony, both smiling in their Sunday best. Jasmine had just won a regional debate tournament. Tony had braided her hair that morning, whispering, "Make them see you." That was the last photo Jasmine had of her. Tony never made it to 17. She was lured by a fake modeling agency through a message board. Jasmine remembered the flyer, cheap ink, big promises. LA scouts looking for fresh talent. No one thought it was dangerous. They thought it was an opportunity. She disappeared in the spring of 2005. By summer, they found her, barely breathing, on the side of a Texas highway. She died 2 days later. At the summit, Jasmine sat still. That photo still in her wallet, right now. She hadn't planned to speak today. Not like this. But Melania's silence, that unguarded moment, it brought Tony's memory roaring back. Would I be proud to watch a girl I loved walk that same path? She already had. And Jasmine would never let that happen again, if she could help it. What no one knew, not her aides, not the press, not even her husband, was that Melania had written Barron a letter 6 years ago. He was 10. She was First Lady. The letter was never mailed, never even printed, just typed and left in her encrypted drafts folder titled, "If He Asks." It began, "If you ever ask me what I did before you came into my life, I'll tell you this. I did what I had to do to survive." The letter was long, honest, brutal in parts. She wrote about being asked to strip down at 17 for a magazine that never even paid her. She wrote about waking up in hotel rooms, not remembering how she got there. She wrote about how power smiled at her only when she didn't speak. Then she wrote about him, Barron. "You are the reason I'm not silent anymore. You are the reason I want to live with truth, not illusion." At the summit, Melania's gaze dropped again. She had never shared that letter. But Jasmine's question, It unlocked something deeper, not shame, not guilt, readiness. And for the first time in public life, Melania looked like she was ready to be fully seen. The moment came quietly. No fireworks, no music cue, no applause. Just a single tear sliding down Melania's cheek. That was all. It wasn't just grief. It wasn't shame. It was the ache of recognition. Recognition of the young girl she once was. Recognition of the woman Jasmine had become. Recognition of the price so many women pay just to be taken seriously. Cameras captured it in perfect light. Melania gently reaching for a tissue, eyes glistening, hands no longer steady. And Jasmine? She said only 5 words, softly, kindly, like a sister would. "You didn't deserve that pain." Gasps came from the audience, not because of what she said, but because of the truth behind it. Melania nodded, just once, and something unspoken passed between them, an invisible bridge built from experience, loss, and the hope that maybe this time, silence wouldn't win. In that moment, millions watching from their living rooms began to cry. Women who had never told their stories, men who had never asked, girls who finally felt seen. It wasn't politics anymore. It was personal. And the most guarded first lady in modern history had just been cracked open, not by scandal, but by compassion. It came not from the microphone, not from a headline-grabbing quote, but from a whisper. Melania leaned toward Jasmine Crockett, and in a voice the cameras barely caught, she said, "No one ever asked me that question before, not even me." Jasmine's eyes didn't flinch. She nodded, then gently reached into her wallet, the same one she had carried through every election, every courtroom, every march. She pulled out a photograph. Tony. She slid it toward Melania, across the glossy table between them. "She was my cousin," Jasmine said quietly. She believed her body was her power, because no one told her her voice mattered more. Melania's hand trembled as she picked up the photo. Something in her face broke, not publicly, not for cameras, but privately, honestly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Jasmine shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. Just help make sure no one else disappears for wanting to be seen." And with that, a seed of healing was planted. Not just between 2 women, but across a nation watching. Because this wasn't about modeling or politics. It was about protection, and finally saying the things that should have been said long ago. When it was over, no one clapped. They couldn't, not because it wasn't powerful, but because clapping felt wrong, too small, too neat, too easy. The silence in the hall was thick, reverent, sacred. Melania stood. Jasmine stood. No words passed between them this time. Just eye contact. 2 women carrying different scars, now sharing the same cause. The moderator stepped forward, visibly shaken. Her hands trembled as she touched her mic. "This summit was supposed to be about leadership," she said. "But I think today we learned what real leadership sounds like." She turned to Jasmine. "Sometimes it's just one question." In the audience, women stood, quietly, then men, then the teenage girls. People weren't standing for applause. They were standing in grief, in gratitude, in awe, because for the first time in a long time, power didn't come from position or title. It came from the truth. And Jasmine Crockett, without raising her voice or demanding attention, had pulled the world into that truth and left it changed. Her name was Lena. She was 14, sitting cross-legged on her twin bed in Oakland. She had paused her math homework when the summit started streaming on YouTube. At first, she didn't care. Just more women in suits saying big words. But then Jasmine asked that question, and everything got still. Lena watched as Melania's face changed, as Jasmine stayed silent, as truth took over the stage. By the end, Lena's cheeks were wet with tears. She had never told anyone that a man on a modeling site messaged her last year, told her she had an international look, told her to send private photos, told her not to tell her mom. She almost did. Now, watching Jasmine speak truth without anger, and Melania shed her walls without shame. Lena opened her phone. She blocked him. Then she whispered, "Thank you." If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of a name, a face, a moment you've kept buried, then don't leave this page without doing one thing. Comment their name. Let them be remembered. Let their story matter. And if Jasmine's question touched your heart, subscribe, because we tell stories that ask what no one else will. And together, we'll make sure silence never gets the final word again. Like, share, comment, because truth once spoken deserves to echo.